And this is kind of a little bit of a recap from last week. Last week, we talked about how Walmart is requiring employees to come back into the office. Well, this week, or actually, I guess technically this is actually last week as well. It's just later in the week. There were 16,000 employees at Amazon are pushing back on RTO. This all stems from Amazon boss Andy Jassy telling staff in an internal company memo that they needed to be back in the office the majority of the time, adding it should be at least 3 days per week. His justification was when you're in person, people tend to be more engaged, observant, and attuned to what's happening in the meetings and the cultural clues being communicated. So like other companies, he's a CEO, wants his folks coming back in. But within an hour of putting this out, there was 5,000 folks who was like, nah, son, this is not what we want. That actually happened on, I think it was 2 Fridays ago. And then by last Tuesday, they had a resource group that was called Remote Advocacy in Slack that had over 16,000 employees. The contents of the channel ranged from snap polls, 80% of which respondents said that if they do this, they're going to ultimately look for other jobs. And it ranged from that to just being furious with all kind of feedback. And they even launched a petition to try to keep this from happening. So just based off our conversation last week, I just wanted to come back and see what you guys' thoughts were on this, that where, this many of their employees are like, no, we do not want to go back into the office.
It's like there was some stuff in this article that I hadn't thought about before as far as making people come back, and the idea that, some people actually moved based off of the fact that they could work from home. And so if they do have to come back, now they either have to have this long commute or move back into the city where it's more expensive and things like that. So there are definitely some considerations to trying to kind of unilaterally just be like, get y'all asses back up in here. But at the end of the day, I mean, the company is the company, and they can do what they want.
I'm curious as to if these companies are really like, we really value the cooperative and the collaborative efforts of being back to work in person. So that's what we really want to get back to. Or is it like, are they like, all right, well, we know we're cutting costs. The economy is changing. There's this talk about recession. So why don't we use making y'all come back in the office as a guise for, we know some of y'all ain't gonna come, so
they weeding some folks out.
Yeah,
basically
weeding some folks out. People, this is our layoffs, making people do things that they have grown accustomed to, or like Stephanie said, came on the auspice that this is going to be a remote job, and then for them to turn around and change their mind. Is this like a guys for we land people?
It's a weed out process
about making them do something they don't want to do. Because
shadow layoff or shadow reduction in force. I actually asked this question last week in on Twitter, and had some pretty good conversation around it. To where and I actually stuck this in the rundown, but it didn't make our last cut. But Google, they've actually asked employees to come back in, but because we want to save money on office space, we want you to just double up. So we want you to find a partner and alternate days. They come in one day and use the cubicle. You come in the next day and use the same cubicle, and work it out amongst yourselves what kind of desk setup and all that kind of stuff you like. So I think that, that too is a play to where we, these companies that we've already done our reduction in force and we took those hits. We still need probably a few less people here. So let's just piss them off and let them leave on their own. We'll still give them a nice severance if they leave, but
see, I didn't look at that Google story the same way. I'm just like, that to me, that's like, you can't have your cake and eat it too. You can't expect to demand to work remotely or only be in the office 2 days or whatever the case may be, but then get mad when the company decides to do what they need to do to maximize office space and run more efficient and lean by having people alternate sharing desks. Like it sounds like they just trying to have their cake and eat it too. If you're clowning Google for that decision, I think it was a smart decision actually, if people are not going to be there.
I personally think the article was misleading. I think they phrased it like that to get people mad, to get the clicks and get the views, because the way the title runs versus how they break it down. If you read the article, it's just like, ain't that what companies been doing? Hoteling, that's been a thing.
And it makes perfect sense.
Makes perfect sense, you know.
Right. So,
but I do believe that there may be some component to that, to where it's like, if we need fewer people, some folks ain't gonna be down with this, and they're gonna exercise their right to leave without us having to lay them off. So more so on the Amazon one though, you got 16,000 people, 80% of which, now people are saying that. Will they actually do it? That is a completely different question. But do you think that Amazon has to look at that? It's like, well, out of 16,000 folks, 80% of them are really, really upset about this. And even though it may not be the overwhelming majority of the folks who said they would leave, we know some of them are going to. Do we just, suck it up and say that that's just what's going to happen? Or do we need to rethink this, rethink this strategy?
I would no, they don't have to. We don't know the effects yet. What I mean by that is, let's just say, I don't know, 40% of these 16,000 people said, nah, I came on to Google because I was under the impression that this was going to be a remote job. You're making me come back in the office. I'm out. Right. We won't know the effects of that. Well, the company won't know the effects of that. If that's the case, in mass, it's got to be in mass. It can't be onesie twosie people. It's got to be a large number, large enough statistic for Google to be like, hey, we don't like how this has turned out. Now we're struggling to find people and we can't hire anybody because everybody's remote and our competitors are hiring all these remote workers. The people have decided remote work, hybrid, 1 or 2 days, maybe at the most in the office is how we're moving forward. Once we see that, then Google will be like, all right, now we have to do something. Right now, it's kind of like, well, we should, to make sure that we're not up against a wall when, if in fact, this is how people decide they want to work going forward.
Yeah, I would agree. And this story was Amazon more so than Google. But
Amazon, I'm sorry.
I do. I agree with your sentiment. And then, Stephanie, back to your point about Google, I did see that kind of that way as well, because I'm thinking it's like, you know what? If you like work in a call center and they have multiple shifts, somebody is using the cubicle when, you clog out, right, and somebody else is coming to clog in.
Absolutely.
You don't necessarily have your own individual space. So, I did go through some of the comments, and some folks are saying, well, for folks who want to come in every day, they can have their own cubicle because they're there every day and they get their own space and they can keep, whatever they want to keep in and don't have to worry about, making sure that it's going to vibe with somebody else. This was, to your point, this is for the folks who, well, if you only want to come in hybrid, we're not going to give you a permanent space. That doesn't make sense to do that. If you're only here 2 or 3 days a week, why would we have space for you for the days that you're not here when we could actually repurpose that space? So I do see that as that way as well. But I also do think that when they start implementing this, some folks are going to say, and anybody can say this for any job that they're in for any reason. If you have a choice, if you decide that I'm not rolling with, I don't like the way you guys are rolling, you can make your decision to move on. I just wonder if somebody is kind of counting that number. I'm certain that somebody's counting it, but is somebody like pre-counting it? Like, we think that so many people are going to leave before we go.
It's the same as actuaries, you know what I mean, that work for car companies. How many people can die if these brakes fail and we won't lose enough money to bankrupt us? They're doing the same type of trade-off, analysis with every decision they make as vis-a-vis employees. So, how many will leave? All right, we can live with that. So let's go ahead and do it.
Right. Yep. Let's say it's going to take the people in mass to be like, nah, for them to be like, all right.
Right. And ain't nobody going to do that because people still need to work. Like,
exactly. So
ain't nobody leaving in mass. You know what I mean? Like, a few folks will leave, right, but it ain't going to be 1,000 people walking out in one day. Like, right. I don't think
definitely not 80% of the 16,000.
No, absolutely not.
I do not see that. Some 8% maybe, but not 80. So y'all, this
Like
next
the
story.
eggs these days, ain't nobody going nowhere.
People talk a good game, you know.
Exactly. Until you really got to sit here and look at that, what that unemployment check going to look like. So yeah, no.
That car note still comes when you decided you don't want to have to share a cubicle, right? Car note still due, mortgage still due.
Every
So
month.
I know we're about to transition, but yeah, if you thought you was gonna be remote 90% of the time, and you come in the office one day and expect to have your own cubicle all to yourself, untouched, that's silly. Come on, it's like, come on.
Right.